Your material is interesting because you're talking about your own life, which a lot of comics do, and you touch a little bit on culture, I think, some of the stuff I've seen, but
Yeah.
you're talking about you, but it's about the audience, I feel like. I feel like you're talking about the people who are listening to you.
That's the one thing I get.
It's like a magic trick.
Yeah, that's the one thing I get, is you must be looking through the window of our house.
Yeah.
And then I think Foxworthy told me, I was doing an interview with him for his podcast, and he said, I don't know what year it was, he goes, I did something that happened at home. I went to the club that night and talked about it, and everybody laughed. And then I realized on my way home that if it happens in my house, maybe it happens in other people's houses. You know, we're not that unique as much as we'd like to think. You know, but I've always been a fan of Cosby. I've always been a fan of something in comedy that there's a truth to it, and then you find some. You know, it's like I just wrote a line about Bactine, the bacterial that they spray on your legs when we were kids and cuts. And it hurt. I mean, my audience know. I mean, you know, when you mention Bactine, everybody goes, "Oh," because it stung when they put it on.
Right.
And I said, "Yeah, to take my mind off the pain of the Bactine, my mother would stab me in the eye with an ice pick." You know.
So you start that way. You start with
with the truth.
common
I try to
thing,
go. Yeah, I mean, it's like if I'm in the, I don't sit down and write much stand up anymore. I just kind of
try it out.
If something happens, you know, I'll bring it. I'll take a shot in the middle of a show and see. You know.
That's incredible because it seems so woven. It seems everything seems very intentional. And
well, I do. I spend more time on segues than I do really on the stories. The stories come. It takes time, you know, and then I'll write a one-liner. I'm worried about my memory. You know, my memory's. You know, I don't know if it's all the alcohol and drugs or it's just my age. I don't know, but I'm worried about it. And I saw this thing for Prevagen, so I was it's a pill you take or some natural thing, and then you saw the key ingredients. A jellyfish, oil of a jellyfish, and you're thinking. First thing I said to my wife was, "Do jellyfish have good memories?" I mean, you know, I've only seen them on shores gasping for life because they forgot to go back out with the tide. You know, you think there was one thing a jellyfish. The one job to remember would be water. I need water to exist. So anyway, that's kind of where, you know. So it sits by itself. You know, I don't have a story. So then I realized at one point I had a conversation with my neighbor. She's 78, and she said she had to take a cognitive test for to get her license. And I said, "Why? You know, you're sharp." She said, "Well, I had trouble with the memory." I go, "What's the memory thing?" 5 things. 20 minutes later, you got to recall. So I start telling the story. Then I realized my 78-year-old father-in-law moved in with us. So all of a sudden, I got a nice story from 3 or 4 completely disconnected things.
Amazing. Yeah.
But how do you weave them together? That becomes to where you're not going. Speaking of my father-in-law,
right.
So then I made up some stuff about him living with us and then walking. He face planted, that was bad. And you go to the emergency room with him, and then I tell my audience, if you're going to take an old guy to an emergency room, you and your wife get your story straight before you get to the emergency room, because there was some discrepancies in our versions of what life was like.